Take Back Your Health Now, Episode 5.
You're listening to the Take Back Your Health Now podcast, the show that interviews the top doctors, athletes, trainers, and entrepreneurs to help you find the holy grail of health. Now here's your host, Dr. Dan Margolin.
So this is Take Back Your Health Now with Dr. Dan Margolin, where we pull out all the steps in search of the holy grail of health. Today's guest, we're really excited to have Mr. Alex Kip on the show. Alex Kip is a Leukemia and Lymphoma Society hero. Spreads his transformational strategies of wellness to major clients like UnitedHealthcare, Nationwide Insurance, Pelotonia, and the University of Michigan. As a certified Tony Robbins-Cloe Maddens life coach, speaker, and writer, he has inspired thousands after surviving Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer, losing his singing voice, and being told he had a 15 to 30% chance of survival. Now in complete remission, with his voice restored, he's been featured on PBS, NPR Stations, the Huffington Post, Addicted to Success, Lifehack, and Buddha Brain. As the creator of KipTV and SoulFeed, a new and noteworthy podcast on iTunes, he's interviewed leaders like Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Seane Corn, Myss, and more. So, Alex Kip, welcome to our show, sir.
Welcome. I'm so excited to be here.
We are excited to have you. My friend, so finding out that you had cancer, how did that change your career path, your life? Like, what was that whole thing like?
Yeah, I mean, it changed everything, really, in a moment, as they say. I was studying at the time at the University of Michigan, which is the #1 school for musical theater and Broadway, so I was on the fast track to a career on Broadway where, singing was my entire life, every single day, just singing.
Right.
And my senior year, I just started sounding like this, and I didn't know what was going on. And when I went to sing, I was like, it sounded like crap.
Oh,
and,
God.
It was horrible. And so finally...
Was that the first symptoms that you were getting?
Yeah, that was some of the first symptoms. And also, I was always in the gym and things like that. And all of a sudden, I'd just be like, couldn't breathe hardly, and I was working out. And so I knew something was going wrong, and it took a while for them to figure it out. But then finally they figured it out, and they figured out I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And essentially I had a giant mass in my chest, like the size of a sheet of computer paper.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So pretty dramatic, obviously, to find that out, having no idea that's what was wrong with me.
I mean, is there a history of that in your family? Anybody gone through anything like that, or that was pretty much
not really. And they of course say, these things just kind of happen, we don't really know why these things happen,
Right.
And that's cool, but at the same time, that can leave you sometimes a little powerless, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, you're wondering what the hell's going on. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that moment for me was actually really interesting because most people experience what they call post-traumatic, fill in the blank for me, post-traumatic.
Yeah, stress, gotcha.
Stress,
yes.
Yeah. But I actually experienced what they call post-traumatic growth.
Wow. Explain that to me.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because when you hear post-traumatic, right, everybody always fills in the blank stress, because that's what our society has conditioned us to believe about certain things like illness or certain things like, just traumatic events, that it's going to be stressful. You're going to have PTSD. You're going to, your life is ruined and all this stuff. But there actually is the opposite, which is post-traumatic growth. It's actually scientific thing. They've done studies on it. They've researched that. And essentially, that's this idea that, okay, when someone goes through something traumatic or extreme, they can actually have extreme growth in a really accelerated short period of time.
Wow.
That likely wouldn't have happened without that event.
It's almost like that saying, what doesn't kill you strengthens you.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So, it was weird because when it happened to me, it's like I immediately understood that this was part of something bigger.
Wow.
And
wow.
at the moment, like, and it's really not hindsight bias. Like, that's really how I looked at it. Because for me, the whole year, you know, I lost my singing voice and I was sounding like this.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, I knew what was causing my voice to vanish. And so for me, it was like, oh my gosh, I can finally sing. I'll be able to sing again.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yes. Because you didn't
Like,
you didn't know
you
didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, now that I know what it is, of course I can fix this. Of course, like, you know, being a 22-year-old, that naivete probably is what saved me in some ways. You know what I mean?
Right. Sure.
And so, yeah, man, it just opened up a whole new power pocket in my soul and in my mind.
Alex,
you know,
let me ask you a question. Why do you think, like, there are some people that go through it and they do exactly what you said, man. What doesn't kill you strengthens you and all that stuff. And there are other people that get crushed, man. They get caved in. What is that difference? What do you think that is?
Yeah, so, you know, I've been trying to answer that question kind of my whole life, right? That's sort of like why I've transitioned and why I do what I do now, which is like really helping people with their mindset and helping people transition into something brilliant and powerful. And I think it has to do with a lot of things. Number one, I think there is a bit of like your natural disposition that comes into play, right? It's like they say people who get a lot of money, it kind of accelerates or it kind of amplifies like what's already within, right? So if they're like a shitty person or like a mean dude, they're probably going to be worse. But if they're like a caring, loving person, they're probably going to be even better. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so to some extent, like, I did always kind of have that like outlook about life, that like everything happens for a reason, everything's for my betterment, everything's for my good, no matter what. So it kind of like amplified that in a moment.
I mean, naturally, Alex Kip was a fighter, basically, right from day one, right? I mean, that was really the nature of who you were.
Yeah, it was. It was. But I definitely, there were definitely parts of me that led to my illness that was like covered up by that, if that makes any sense.
Explain it to me a little bit more.
So, like, I take full responsibility for what happened to me. As in, I take responsibility for creating a part of that disease. Okay?
Yep.
And the reason I say that is because, number one, and I just want to make a disclaimer here. Everything I'm saying and everything you're talking to me about and all this is the holy grail for me, right?
Right.
So anyone listening to this, you know, the thing I want people to understand the most about all this, hopefully, with at least in my interview, is that you have to find the holy grail for yourself, you know?
Yeah.
And people will have clues as to maybe what that is, or like, oh, this food could do that, or this supplement could do that, or this mindset trick could do that. But at the end of the day, you have to experiment with your own reality, your own being, and your own healing to find the right combination that's appropriate for you. So I just kind of want to put that out there.
You know what? I like that disclaimer, and I should probably put that on all the shows, actually. But you're right. It's, you know, we're throwing a broad net out, saying, hey, we're looking for the holy grail of health, and maybe in some respects there is no specific holy grail. Maybe each of us will take away or find our own pathway, our own holy grail. And I think with our show, what we're trying to do is provide those many pathways that might have even been blocked up to this point, where people just didn't know about it. You know, listening to your story, to me, it's just inspiring, man. It's inspiring. You're given a 15 to 30% chance of survival, and you're not sitting here like falling apart. You're actually coming together, man. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, this is why I do what I do, because obviously I want people to be inspired to know that like it's never too late for them. Like whatever that means, you know, in your health, in your business, in your career, in your relationships, like whatever it is, it's never too late for you. But at the same time, you have to put some attention into it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Attention and intention, like
Right.
very, very skillfully and intensely in some ways, you know? So going back to what I was saying about accepting that I have a part in this, because if I accept that, okay, I had a part in creating this, the reason that's so powerful is because, okay, well, man, if I created this thing, then surely I can uncreate it.
Wow. Wow.
You know what I mean?
That's really taking like a sort of a pan-determined responsibility level for this thing, right? You're looking at it from every angle and saying, listen, I'm going to really take responsibility for this.
Yeah, and because if I didn't, then in my mind at least, my chances of surviving were dramatically less, you know?
Yep. Now, Alex, let me ask you a question. Not to cut you off, but so you like, is this like an immediate reaction, or is it like, you hear that diagnosis, right? Was there at any point that you just went like down tone or got beat up for a short period, or immediately did you just go, crap, I'm going to beat this, let's go? How was that initial kind of response?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it sounds weird to people, but for real, it really was like, I'm gonna beat this. Like, I have no doubt in my mind. Like, this is just, I'm gonna get my voice back. I'm gonna blah blah blah. And again, I think that was a bit of my like youthful thinking. You know what I mean?
Sure,
And
sure.
in some ways, my ego like actually serving my power and my purpose at that point. But I think what it really did for me more than anything was it kind of opened up this sort of spiritual lens for me that I had been sort of ignoring or not really wanting to look at. And when I say spiritual lens, I just mean an appreciation for life in a new way and an appreciation for something sort of beyond myself that was sort of, one, helping me through this, but two, also maybe giving me this in order to kind of wake me up in a way.
Did it sort of realign your priorities, I guess?
Yeah, it realigned my priorities and my purpose and why I'm here on this earth. And I just remember, like, I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks between them figuring out and like giving me my first rounds of chemo and all this stuff. And those are also like the 2 weeks before graduation. So I just remember the first time getting out of that hospital and walking around the streets of Ann Arbor and just seeing everything completely differently.
Wow.
I'm just looking around like, wow, I've lived here for 4 years. I spent 4 years of my college life here, and I've never seen Ann Arbor like
Wow.
this.
Was it
I've
like
never
the grass
seen,
was never that green, the skies were never
yeah,
that blue?
you
Yep,
know?
yep, I do.
And what it did was it forced me to connect to the present moment again. It forced me to come back to what's real now. Because prior to that, I was so trapped in my head. My ego really, really ran my life. Like, I was constantly thinking, constantly in my head, constantly like worried about the next audition, or could I hit that note in that song, or could I, become the next leading man on Broadway, or was I gonna get this role in this show, or what about next year? And and your mind just goes crazy until one day you're so stressed out that it's just like, hey, you've got cancer. You need to slow down.
Wow. Wow.
You're like, whoa, okay.
I mean, I'm almost getting the sense that it hit the reset button for you.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
And, I'm so beyond grateful for that moment because the kind of things, I experience now, just like in the way I show up for people, in the way that I show up for my own life, in the way that people, kind of show up for me, is just completely different.
Wow.
The,
You know what
the,
I could relate this to just a little bit. Not with the severity, but I was older when I had my daughter. Right. I'm 54 now. She's 8 years old, and I
mhm.
think to myself, when I was a younger man, would I have appreciated her? Like now, every time she moves, I'm like, look at that gorgeous child. I just want to kiss her face every second. And it's such, it's such a beauty and such an appreciation. And I think because I am older, I understand, again, like you said, the priorities and the things that, when I was younger, it was maybe going out and getting drunk and, whatever. but now it's like, so you start to really take those life experiences. And it's exciting, Alex, speaking with you, because you've taken those experiences and you've taken the things that have traumatized others, and you've actually brought a message of hope and of life and of just decency, honestly, like when I'm speaking to you. And it's appreciated. It really is. Well done, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think what's important too is that, like, I'm really just trying to live a life of love, and like if people resonate with that, great, but like I'm not doing it for people to notice. If people notice, like, I don't know, does that make sense? Like,
you know what though, when you're decent and you're doing the right thing, people can't help but they may not notice it by saying, my God, Alex just did that. But you know what? They'll notice it because they themselves will actually pass on some of that the next day or to other people. So it just emanates from you, my friend. Just talking to you, it emanates. I can feel it on the other side of the line here. Now let me ask you a question, sir. So looking at it, I got from a spiritual viewpoint, from your change in direction, all that. How about in terms of your body and like your diet, exercise? Like what were you doing before? How did it change after? Like, do you start taking supplements? Like, what did you do physically in the physical realm to actually now get yourself to heal?
Yeah, so I did a lot of things. I mean, I was a college student, so I was drinking Mountain Dew every day, burgers, pizza,
I don't know what you're talking
vegetables. Vegetables are like, what are vegetables? You know what I mean? Like, and and the thing was, though, it's so funny because I was like really muscular, still had a six pack, like 200 pounds of muscle, you know what I mean? So right. But you still don't realize like what those things are doing to the inside of your body. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And immediately it was just like, okay, changing everything, go time. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And my mom actually had set me up with this kind of more like weirdo doctor, that people think of, and like, ooh, he talks about like gluten-free, and he talks about like, acupuncture, and he talks, and people are still weirded out by those kind of things, but I'm like, great, let's talk to him right now.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
He's got people flying in from like China to like help with their arthritis, like all this stuff. So it really was my first eye opener to just how important, all of that is as well. So yeah, I mean, I went gluten-free kind of from that day on, just based on some of the research that's out there, and based on some of his findings and a lot of other findings.
And what are some of the findings? Like, I don't completely understand. Like, what is gluten-free? What does that mean actually? Like, how does that affect your body?
So it depends. But when you're thinking in terms of like cancer, for instance, cancer generally likes to feed off of inflammation. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So if you imagine like this little, like this big monster in your body, it wants food. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like when you're inflamed, it's like eating all the time. It's like, oh great, I can eat. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's really only two kind of. I mean, this is really simplifying things. And again, I'm not a doctor, but I know a lot about this just because I had to.
No, you know what, Alex? I got to tell you, one thing I found is that people that actually know something can simplify it, and people that don't know something complicate it a great deal.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean?
Sure.
So we're really looking for the simplification of it. So
yeah.
Yep.
So your body normally is either in an acidic state or what they call an alkaline state. So an acidic state is kind of what it sounds like, right? It's like very acid-like in your body. It's like a lot of inflammation. So a lot of times that can come from, processed foods. Anything that's processed really is likely acidic. Gluten is acidic. So gluten is actually the thing that binds bread together, essentially. So it's not bread itself. It's like the material that's kind of gluing it together. And before the 1930s, there was no such thing as gluten in bread. But then
Okay.
they had to start mass producing it to start feeding more people and more people and more people. Then all of a sudden, gluten's everywhere. Then all of a sudden, cancer rates start rising, which is interesting.
Interesting.
And so there's ties of these things like that. And a lot of people, gluten intolerances, celiac disease was never a thing until obviously we introduced it into our foods. A lot of people who experience brain fog or just like mild depression or like kind of slowness, a lot of times they can't figure it out. A lot of times it's because of gluten, things like that.
Right.
So essentially, you don't want your tumor to have a lot of food to feed off of. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So when your body's more in an alkaline state, which is more, your greens, your fruits, your vegetables, there's not a lot of acid in there, then the tumor doesn't have as much to feed on. So it can't eat, so it can't grow, it can't get bigger.
So you're saying, so in a basic environment, you're basically starving the cancer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And obviously that's in some ways, when you're having chemotherapy and things like that, like that's wreaking havoc on your body too. So you definitely don't want to be inflamed while that's happening. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the chemotherapy obviously has a little different incentive. That's basically like dropping an atomic bomb on your body.
Sure.
But then, as it's like rebuilding from the ashes, again, you don't want to like be rebuilding a wasteland with toxic materials.
It's an interesting point, right? You hear so many patients going through chemo for things, and you're wondering, like, what are the supplemental things that they can do in terms of their diet to actually support those treatments so that they can actually help those or assist those treatments? Or the way you're putting it makes sense to me now, where they're going through the chemotherapy, they're getting this kind of atomic Hiroshima kind of a situation, where I got to imagine there's got to be a massive inflammation coming in following that. And by limiting it, you're actually helping and assisting with the chemo. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I gotta say though too that like what's very frustrating is that the science of nutrition is really only like 100 years old, so it's very 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 new. And the problem is that we don't have enough like scientific studies to know exact like data. And so the thing is, if I go to my oncologist and I start saying, and this happened to me, I'm like, well, okay, well, what kind of like lifestyle things can I do? Like, what kind of changes in my diet should I be making? And he's just like, oh, don't worry about it. You don't need to worry about that. And I'm just like, no, like you're wrong. Like there's something not right about what you just said. You know what I mean?
Alex, what you're saying is really the reason for our broadcast. Just because over the years I've just had patients asking me questions that as a podiatrist I shouldn't be asked. I shouldn't be the one handling those questions. But I found there wasn't anybody in certain situations that was. And a lot of the things you're talking about were to some degree poo-pooed. And it wasn't because the doctors didn't care. It just nobody actually took the time to actually educate them. They were being educated in their specific areas. And
Totally.
they became insular a little bit. And so,
Totally.
I just think it would help us all to sort of broaden our horizons and sort of look out and say, well, what is working in other areas? If something would support chemotherapy and not hurt, why would you not do it? Well, it wouldn't make any sense to me to not be gluten-free or, whatever it is that you discover is your pathway towards that.
Yeah, and I think what's really important as we're shifting into new times and new discoveries is that, we really need to start bringing together doctors with, Ayurvedic specialists or like, alternate homeopaths or, people need to start talking, right? It's like in the West, we treat specific illness. It's like, we treat the things that are happening. But in the East, they treat the root cause of why this happened. They're not as necessarily interested in like, okay, you have cancer. They're more interested in like, okay, what caused this cancer to happen?
Wow.
Because the thing is, like, you can fix the cancer, but then if you don't fix the root cause underneath it, there's a good chance it can come back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, let me ask you a question, Alex. When you're talking about that, and maybe this is too broad a question, but what are a few of the root causes that I should make my audience aware of, or that you think could be there that maybe they don't perceive, or maybe it's so obvious that they're just not looking at it?
Totally. So, we're talking about the physical right now, but really one of the main root causes is the mental and sort of psychosomatic root cause of all this. And what I mean by that is like, look at like the dawn of like epigenetics, which like, again, to simplify this because I'm not a epigeneticist, but
just define what is an epigeneticist?
Yeah, so epigenetics essentially is the study of kind of how your genes sort of mutate, right? So a lot of people used to think that, oh, okay, the reason people get sick is because they have this genetic predisposition. And they're finding now that while that may be true, almost like 95% of diseases are caused by your mind, your environment, and the things you're putting into your body.
Wow.
Which means that, like, yes, you may have the predisposition, but you also have the power whether or not you're turning on that switch or turning off that switch.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So,
I remember there was a study, right? And I forget, I saw it a long time ago, and I've seen it in 3 different places, basically 3 different studies where they had seeds, right? And they had 3 types of seeds, and they'd have these monks pray over one set of seeds to grow. And they wouldn't pray over another. They'd be left, and they would be praying for another set of seeds to die. Mm-hmm. And the seeds that were prayed over to grow grew, and the ones that were neutral, got to a certain height, but not as big as the other ones. And the ones that were prayed over to die died. I mean, in a little bit, it's almost like what you're saying, where it's the viewpoint. It's really that sort of spiritual realm affecting the physical body.
Yeah, and there was also another group of seeds that was completely ignored. Okay. And those seeds actually did worse than the ones that died.
Wow.
So that's interesting too. And there's also studies of scientists who have water basically. So first off, if you want to read a cool book, check out Dr. Lipton about epigenetics. That's an amazing one.
That was going to be my question to you. Is that one of your favorite health resources?
It's a great one. It's called The Power of Belief. That's a really great one. But
Power of Belief. Okay.
Just to go back to another cool study, this guy was doing studies on water because 75% of our body is water, right?
Right.
And so one beaker, he essentially sent loving thoughts, loving energy, love, love, love. The other beaker, he sent hateful thoughts, like nasty stuff. And then he froze the beakers of water. And the beaker of water that had all the love and all the gratitude and generosity had like this beautiful snowflake shape to it under the microscope. And the beaker that had all the hate and the nastiness and all this stuff was like literally just like looked like horrible, looked like
disorganized. I saw that. I absolutely saw that. Yep. Yeah, it's amazing, right? It's like, wow, there is something more than we give credit to.
Yeah, and so, as much as I like to talk about the physical and, the diet and all this stuff, it really comes back to your mind. It really, really does. I mean, look at the number one killer, right, is heart disease, right? Mm-hmm. Is like, and what's the number one cause of heart disease? Stress. What's the number one cause of stress? Your mind, your environment, your interaction, you know what I mean? So it's like,
and sometimes the people you surround yourself with that are actually like creating that whole situation.
And that has to do with your environment. And so why are we so scared of like this sort of like spiritual, like mind body relationship world? It really, it's funny, right? We're so scared of it because we don't understand it. And yet look how sick we are. Look how sick everybody's getting. Like, hello,
I mean, let me ask you, because that's the truth, right? You just see, like, we're spending so much money now on care, on healthcare, and yet, from my observation, people seem to be getting, in some areas, sicker and sicker and sicker. And you think that's the reason? You think it's just that they haven't really grasped this concept of their own spirituality and that kind of thing?
So for my truth, and it may be different than anybody else's, but that's what helped me. That's what really has given me more power than I ever thought I could ever have, has made me feel in so much more in control. I mean, literally, even on like in a body sensational way. Like,
Alex, that is so wonderful. Alex, we're going to start to wind down here. Let me ask you, where can listeners find you, find out more about you? Where would they do that?
Yeah, for sure. So if any of this piqued an interest in your mind or your soul or your spirit, you can visit SoulFeed, the podcast. You can just, type it in on your podcast app, SoulFeed. We've interviewed some of the best leaders in the world. We're creating some amazing content, and we're launching SoulFeed TV soon. Also, if you want to talk with me or have a free coaching, I do that as well for people. You can just visit alexkip.com, and you can find out more about me and hear more about what I do.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us on our show. It was really awesome, and the listeners are going to get so much out of it. It's really greatly appreciated, sir.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
This episode is sponsored by New Jersey Foot and Ankle Center in Orodo, New Jersey. Remember, when you have a foot problem, you've got a foot doctor in the family. Weekend and evening appointments are available. Call us at 201-261-9445. Once again, that's 201-261-9445. Thanks for listening. Check out the show notes over at drdanspeaks.com. If you're loving the show, head over to iTunes and leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time. Voiceovers for this episode were provided by Randy Ramos Jr. To see and hear more of his work, visit randyramosjr.com.